You're listening to the Intrepid radio program with Scotty Roberts. Intelligent talk.
Well, happy Tuesday evening, folks. Welcome to my program. This is Scotty Roberts, and you're listening to the Intrepid radio program right here on the Odyssey Radio Network. That's ODYSY1.com. And come on over and watch the video simulcast on my YouTube channel. That's youtube.com/Mr. Scotty Roberts. Now, if you are wondering why my eyes over in the video aren't looking right at the camera, I was just adjusting some sound. Made sure that I was adjusted, and we're picking up this microphone tonight. So that's it. That's all about the technical stuff. Thank you for being here. Thank you for being here last night when we did a live show. That was a lot of fun. And again, we're working up to doing that full time, hopefully by the end of this week if all goes well. So thank you for being here tonight. I am going to take us in a completely different direction tonight, mostly because I have broken my it's not really a sworn oath, but my, what do I want to call that? It's my standard of not going to politics, because everybody else does politics. How many people do you hear every day talking about what's going on with the election, or what's going on with Trump or Biden, or anything political? It drives our lives. It runs our worlds. And that's why it's so easy to lapse into it. Yet at the same time, everybody else does it. And sometimes it's good to get away from that. It's good to talk about it, but it's good to get away from it. So there are times where I need to talk about those things, and times where I'd rather not talk about those things. And by the way, folks, if I didn't say where, and you're new to the show, video simulcast is on my YouTube channel, youtube.com/Mr. Scotty Roberts. And you can come on over and join the live chat room with fellow Intrepheads listening and talking up a storm right now. So thank you for being here tonight. Before I go too deep, I want to show off a couple of things. As most of you who are my regular audience knows, and if you're watching the video, you can see by some of the logos here. I've got the Son of a Patriot logo here, and Hell's Head Coffee logo over here, and I've got all this stuff that I promote, that is some of it my personal business, because that's where I make a living. And this is a show where I don't usually take a long ad break, but when I do, you get to hear a little bit about what I do, how to avail my services and for yourself. And I'm a graphic designer, an illustrator, an artist, photographer, a writer, all of those things you can find on my website, scottallenroberts.com. You can find the books I've written. You can find all the work I do, logo design work, corporate identity work, illustration, book design. All of that stuff is there. So if you need any of that, you know where to go, scottallenroberts.com. Give me a shout anytime. And I'll tell you right now, you can call my phone number, 651-468-8115. Don't call in the middle of the night. Sometimes I pick up if I'm awake, sometimes I don't. But my phone's usually there. My family is sleeping nearby. My wife right next to me, and I don't want to wake anybody up. So call me anytime during business hours, usually any day of the week, and you can get a hold of me. And let's see, what else? Something I wanted to share with you today. Those of you who are familiar with my Etsy page, that's etsy.com/shop/Son of a Patriot. Where is it? It's right there. It's hard to do this in a mirror reflection on my own camera, on my screen. So, Son of a Patriot. Come on over. See my stuff. See what I do. See the shirt designs, the mug designs, all these designs I've put on shirts, many of them for various shows that we've done and topics that we've been in. But tonight I want to show you off something. If you haven't seen them, and if you hadn't seen my Facebook page, I put these up. I just started taking, because somebody asked me once, I put up a picture from Egypt, and they said, man, those would make awfully cool prints to frame and put on our wall. And I said, you know what? I'll put some together. And so I did. I took original photography of mine and I did some filtering work to them in Photoshop, and I put them up as framed prints that you can buy over on my Etsy page. Now, they're not the cheapest thing on there. It's $192 to get one of these framed pictures. And as if you can imagine, if you've ever had a photograph that you've taken, or a painting or a print that you've taken to get framed, you know what the cost of framing is. You're sometimes spending $200 and $300 just for the framing. And so what I've done is I've made these available. They're printed on a strong canvas, and they've got their own frames built into them. And so you can go take a look at them. I'm going to show off a couple of them here for you. And these are my images from Egypt that I took and I put into, okay, you ready? Here we go. I'll show off a few of these to you. This one right here, this is the temple at Esna. Esna is down on the Nile, south of Luxor. And Esna has an old temple that's been excavated out of the middle of the town. And they've dug down about 30, 40 feet into a big pit in the middle of town, and they found this temple. And these are the pillars at the temple of Esna in Egypt, the temple of Khnum. And so you can go see this print over on my page. I'm going to go through a few of my prints here for you to take a look at. Now, this next one is another one I put up. This is from the Sinai. Now, this is atop, you've heard me talk about Serbet el-Khadim and how we visited Sheikh Barakat in the middle of the Sinai desert. And this is one of the low plateau top mountains that's in there that we believe is, John Ward and I, in our book, The Exodus Reality, believe this is the place that was the holy mountain of God, the Mount Sinai in the Bible. And I know Flinders Petrie was one of the late 19th, early 20th century archaeologists that believed that this was the mountain of God. And there's the temples of Ptah and Hathor at the top. And what you're seeing in this image, even though it's got an art filter on it, made to look more like artwork, is the ruins. There are chambers. Think of the size of a garage, a standard house garage in your neighborhood, or any house you live in, a one-car garage. And you'll get the idea of the size of these little chambers that were built out in a straight line from the temple for about 1,500 years by successive pharaohs. And then somewhere in antiquity, earthquakes and the ruinations of man came in and tore it down. These ruins are scattered all across the top of that site. And you can walk through these successive chambers and look at the different pharaohs who were there. I believe this was the Mount Sinai. This is where Moses went to visit the priests during that 40 days. And the people said, "Where is Moses?" And Moses and Aaron said, "Well, he's gone up on the mountain." And they said, "Well, make us a god that we may worship it." And what did they do? They made the golden calf. And, of course, the golden calf representing the Egyptian goddess Hathor, whose mountain this is, whose base they were camped around, this mountain of Hathor. So this is at Serbet el-Khadim. If we move on, I've got, this is just a picture of the Sphinx. You've seen a million of them. This is the Sphinx on the plateau of Giza. And you can see very hazy to the left in the background the Great Pyramid of Cheops, or Khufu, which is standing in the mist in the background. It's not really mist, it's dusty mist. Sometimes the wind will come, and you can see how clear the sky is. It's not a storm, but the wind blows and the dust raises up, and you can barely see through the dust that's raised in the air. So this is the pyramid. And then, of course, Saqqara. This is where the stepped pyramid of Djoser is. And this is off to the right in this picture. You don't really see it, but that complex that you see on the ground to the right, that is where those temples all are, where the Hebsed court is, where I had the vision of the ancient priests, and where I saw that figure in the photographs. This was all right here at this site. So this is the step pyramid of Djoser at Saqqara, which is just a little south of Cairo, a little south of the Giza Plateau. And this, they say, was one of the first pyramids that was built there. And then I'll show you the next one. This is Luxor. Now in Luxor, you've got the city on the east bank and the city on the west bank. And the west bank is smaller. The modern cities on the east bank, that's where you have the temples of Karnak, the Luxor temple itself. You have the 3.5 long road of sphinxes that goes from the gates of Luxor temple down to Karnak. Well, this is on the west bank, and these are the statues of Amenhotep I. This would have been the son of Ahmose the first, who drove the Hyksos out, and these colossi of Memnon are still standing there. And they found a third one of these, a little different, just a little to the rear of these. It was toppled over and buried in the dirt just a few years ago, the last time I was there, and they erected that statue, pulled it back up and put it in its place. So here is the Colossi of Memnon, and this is all on the west bank of Luxor. And you see in the background, especially to the left, the beginning of the Theban mountains, where you've got all these other temples, and you've got the Valley of the Kings. This is this next one. This is Serebet el-Khadim. I told you about it with the ruins and the golden calf and the chambers of the pharaohs and so on the mountaintop. This, you can see the wadi down below in the lower part. That's the sand expanse, the little valley there, or the wadi. And the sheikh's camp was to the right, about 1/4 of a mile. And we climbed up on this side so we could get a good shot of Serebet el-Khadim, which is still the mountains in the back. You see the double peaks right in the center? Those are way in the background. But you come a little bit forward, kind of the middle background, and to the left, and over the top there is Serebet el-Khadim, and the ruins of the temples of Hathor and Ptah. And so this is the site as I saw it from the opposing mountaintop that we climbed up to get some pictures of the valley and pictures of Serebet. And this, of course, is, that's me. I tried to make it look abstract enough so nobody would go, oh, I don't want a picture of Scotty hanging in my living room. But this is the temple of Hatshepsut in Luxor, the temple of Jesher-Jesheru in Luxor, Egypt. And this is Diyar el-Bahri and her temple, Hatshepsut, the queen pharaoh of Egypt. And so those are all the prints that I have up over at the, and I'll close them backwards so you can take a peek at them as I go. So of Hatshepsut and Serebet el-Khadim in the middle of the Sinai, and the Colossi of Memnon in Luxor, and Saqqara's stepped pyramid of Djoser, and the Sphinx, of course, on the Giza Plateau. And this is Serebet el-Khadim again in the Sinai on top at the temples. And, of course, the pillars at Esna. These pillars are about 40 feet tall. Massive. And so there you go. There are some pictures that I've put up. And I could do hundreds of these. I've got thousands upon thousands of pictures I've taken over the several times I've been to Egypt. And I thought I'd throw these up there. Those are available over on my Etsy page, my Son of a Patriot page. So if you want to take a look at them, avail yourself of them, buy a series of them. There they are. So I want to thank you for taking a look and placating me as I show some of that off. That was all a big, long, you could say it was an advertisement. It was just showing off some of my work before we get into what I want to talk about tonight. And as I mentioned, I want to get off politics for at least a day. We don't know what's going to happen over the next few days. But let's move into something very different. And I hope that those pictures, part of the reason I'm showing those was not just to show you where you could get them if you want them, but to, at the same time, set a little mood with the visuals tonight. And as you know, I'm a great lover of poetry. Now, those of you who are here that don't like poetry, or you think poetry is sappy, or it's not something, men don't like poetry, certainly. Or, and that's could be across the board. There could be women who don't like poetry. But I wanted to spend some time and do nothing more than read for you some of my favorite poems from one of my favorite poets. It's a William Butler Yeats. And he was the poet laureate of Ireland at the turn of the 20th century. And he was a man who was a great believer in the netherworld, a believer in the fairies, that the fae were real and they interacted with us, and that spirit world interacted with us. And so I wanted to look up a few of his favorite poems from this book. I've had this book for probably 25 years, just selected poems of his. And in a way demonstrate to you why he was so powerful to me. And I might take you just through a little bit. If you don't know who William Butler Yeats is, I'm going to read it right out of the introduction of this book. He was an Irish poet, not an English poet. And it's an important distinction, which Yeats throughout his career made very clear. And although the Yeats family was of English descent, by the time of William's birth in Dublin on June 13th of 1865, they'd been in Ireland for more than 200 years. And Yeats grew up in a turbulent area of increasing Irish nationalism and rebellion against English rule. And he became actively involved in the struggles for Irish independence, which you could later refer to some of these in the early 20th century as the Troubles. And by the early 1890s, he had helped form the Irish Literary Society of London and the Natural Literary Society in Dublin to promote Irish cultural awareness. And in 1896, he became a member of the Irish Republican Brotherhood, an organization which actively sought independence from Great Britain, from England. And by many times by violent means, they sought this independence, if necessary. In 1922, to reward his patriotic efforts, he was made a senator in the newly formed Irish Free State. But his real contribution to Ireland was literary. In 1923, he became the first Irishman to win the Nobel Prize in Literature. Yeats believed that political and economic independence for Ireland was not sufficient, and that equally or more important was the freedom from England's materialistic culture. And he felt that the richness and vitality of the more pastoral Irish way of life, that those things were reflected in its myths, its legends, its folklore, and he believed that through the cultivation of its art, Ireland could revive its unique culture and preserve an ancient ideal of life. And Yeats became a leader in the movement known as the Irish Literary Renaissance. One of their major projects was the establishment in 1904 of the Irish National Theatre, later the Abbey Theatre, a showcase for talented Irish playwrights including Yeats, Sean O'Casey, and John Synge. Yet Yeats' greatest contribution to the movement was his own poetry. He is Ireland's greatest poet, and many believe that no other modern English or American poet can match his vision and his versatility. Now, this book that I'm going to read some poems from is a collection of poems from the first half of his career. The poems trace his development from a talented, late Romantic poet into one of the most powerful and unique voices of 20th century verse. And through all of the changes in the style and substance of Yeats' poetry, there is one constant: the musical quality of his language. There is, for him, poetry and music were inseparable. He believed poetry arises from the magic spells of the ancient and the mystical sorcerers. His poems are always pleasing to the ear, and this is his most powerful hold over the reader, perhaps explaining his popularity not only with the critics, but also with the general readers, who may not always understand the complex symbolism contained in his poetry. Yeats' genius and ultimate craft lay in his realization of this. As he himself said, "I like a poem to have fine machinery, but if it is made to appear anything more than that, the spell of the poetry is broken." Yeats died on January 28th of 1939, and he was certainly the most successful magician of his age. And we've got to go out in a couple of minutes, so I'm going to read one short poem of his that I have marked in this book, and then we'll move on to a few others. This is a poem I always loved of his, and I once wrote this to somebody romantically. It's called "He Wishes for the Cloths of Heaven." Had I the heavens' embroidered cloths, enwrought with golden and silver light, the blue and the dim and the dark cloths of night and light and the half-light, I would spread the cloths under your feet. But I, being poor, have only my dreams. I have spread my dreams under your feet. Tread softly, because you tread on my dreams. All right, folks, we're going to go out to break. So that's been the first half. Join me for the second half. We're going to look into Yeats a little bit more. Sit tight. We'll be right back.
Are you looking for a really awesome and amazing graphic designer? How about an illustrator or a photographer? This is Rainey Roberts, and I wanted to tell you how you can get my designer, illustrator husband, Scotty Roberts, to work for you on your project. Do you have an awesome self-published book but no cover, or even worse, a cover that really sucks? Do you need a kick-ass logo for your company or some f***ing awesome graphic designs for your ads or website? Then get in touch with my husband for the best f***ing awesome kick-ass design and illustration. He knows his stuff and he's been at this for more years than I've been alive. Go to ScottAlanRoberts.com. That's Scott with 2 T's, AlanRoberts.com to take a look at his online portfolio of work, or call 651-468-8115. Now go out and kick some ass with some kick-ass graphic design.
Hire my dad so he can take me to Disneyland.
All right, folks, thanks for sitting on through that break. This is Scotty Roberts. You're watching my show, the Intrepid radio program, right here on the Odyssey Radio Network. That's ODYSY1.com. Come on over and see all the goodness that's Odyssey Radio. Find out all the places where you can hear this show in its audio format and catch up on some of the archives over at places like iTunes and Spreaker and iHeartRadio and so on. You can also come on over to my YouTube channel and watch the video simulcast of this show, and also join the live chat room going on right now with brother and sister Intrepheads over at my YouTube channel, and that's youtube.com/Mr. Scotty Roberts. Now, the first half of this show has been very different, as will the second half be, because we're just talking about poetry. I'm talking about Yeats, the poet laureate of Ireland in the early 20th century. A man who was established as a literary giant in Ireland, a man who served his government, a man who was part of the early forms of the Irish Republican Army, a man who fought strongly for the independence of Ireland from England. And he was a man who wrote poetry that was music. It was lyrical. It was beautiful to the ear, and he wrote this poetry for the purpose of not just writing down rhyming words, but to share with the world the art and the soul of the culture of Ireland. And you can see this in his works. You can hear it in the music of his words. You can read his poems and see his love for the mythology of Ireland, his belief in the existence of the mythos of Celtic Ireland. Now, of course, Irish will say they are the Celts. You ask an Irishman who speaks Gaelic if he knows how to speak Gaelic, and what does he think of Scots Gaelic and Welsh Gaelic and Irish Gaelic, and he'd say, well, Gaelic is Irish, so the rest are just copies. And so there are slight variations. And so you will see this in his language, in the way he says the things he says. And there are many of his poems that for me were... I have always said that there is not an emotion that exists for humans that Yeats did not address or write about in his poetry. And he was also the editor of some books. There's a book I have that I read stories to. There's stories of Ireland, and the old stories, the old tales. And I read them for my children. And there's one called Jamie Friel and the Fairies. Now, Yeats did not write this story, but he edited this book. And so I'll read that to my kids. And many times I would read Yeats' poetry to my kids. Many times they would not be able to really click into the deeper message and meaning of his words, but they could hear the lyrical nature of the words. He has this song that he wrote. Well, it's a poem. It's called A Cradle Song. It says, "The Danann children laugh in cradles of wrought gold, and clap their hands together and half close their eyes, for they will ride the north when the ger-eagle flies, with heavy whitening wings and a head fallen cold. I kiss my wailing child and press it to my breast, and hear the narrow graves calling my child and me. Desolate winds that cry over the wandering sea, desolate winds that hover in the flaming west, desolate winds that beat the doors of heaven and beat the doors of hell and blow there many a whimpering ghost. O heart the winds have shaken, the unappeasable host is comelier than candles at Mother Mary's feet. Do you think there's something in there where he's talking about how the old ways, the old gods, are more important, more significant than the Catholic Church? O heart the winds have shaken, the unappeasable host is comelier than candles at Mother Mary's feet. So, I hope you can. I'm not going to sit and describe the messages. I just want to read some of these poems, and I want you to be able to soak in what he's saying here. There's a song that I have sung. I've heard it sung. I've heard several versions of this. Some of Yeats' poems put to music. And I think the first group I heard play this was a Celtic group called Alton. I had heard them live in Minneapolis many years ago. And they sang the Song of Wandering Angus. You may have heard this song before. I have, again, many of these poems in this book are poems that I have transcribed and used in life, used in public speaking. I've sent them to in romantic settings. I've sent them in sad settings in various different stages of life, settings of life. And this is one that I always liked. I want you to hear the message in this song. Think of this, again, I call it a song because that's part of the title. It's called The Song of Wandering Angus. But think of the words of this and see what it says to you. I went out to the hazel wood because a fire was in my head. And I cut and peeled a hazel wand and hooked a berry to a thread. And when white moths were on the wing and moth-like stars were flickering out, I dropped the berry in a stream and caught a little silver trout. When I had laid it on the floor, I went to blow the fire aflame. But something rustled on the floor, and someone called me by my name. And it had become a glittering girl, with apple blossom in her hair, who called me by my name and ran, and faded through the brightening air. Though I am old with wandering through hollow lands and hilly lands, I will find out where she is gone, and kiss her lips and take her hands, and walk among long dappled grass and pluck till times and times are done, the silver apples of the moon, the golden apples of the sun. I get chills down my neck, up my back, and the backs of my arms when I read that. I went to lay the fish I had caught on the floor, and I went to stir the fire. But something rustled on the floor, and someone called me by my name. It had become a glimmering girl with apple blossoms in her hair. She called me by my name and ran and faded in the brightening air. Then he spends the rest of his life looking for her. Who is she? The next one sequentially in this book is the Song of the Old Mother. I rise in the dawn, and I kneel and blow till the seed of the fire flicker and glow, and then I must scrub and bake and sweep till stars are beginning to blink and peep, and the young lie long and dream in their bed of the matching of ribbons for bosom and head. And the day goes over in idleness, and they sigh if the wind but lift a tress, while I must work because I am old, and the seed of the fire gets feeble and cold. This poem called The Host of the Air, I borrowed some lines from it for Tam O'Hare. When Tam had, if you remember the book, at the end of my book, he's looking for the lost girl who's been stolen by the Fae, the wee folk, the good people. And he cannot bring her home once he finds her, and he weeps. And I borrowed the last lines of this poem for, and I altered them just a touch, but see what you think of this poem called The Host of the Air. Think of the mystical legends, mythologies of the Fae, the fairy folk, the spirit beings. O'Driscoll drove with a song, the wild duck and the drake, from the tall and the tufted reeds of the drear Heart Lake. And he saw how the reeds grew dark at the coming of the night tide, and dreamed of the long dim hair of Bridget his bride. He heard while he sang and dreamed a piper piping away, and never was piping so sad, and never was piping so gay. And he saw young men and young girls who danced on a level place, and Bridget his bride among them, with a sad and a gay face. The dancers crowded about him, and many a sweet thing said, and a young man brought him red wine, and a girl brought him white bread. But Bridget drew him by the sleeve, away from the merry hands, the merry bands, two old men playing at cards with a twinkling of ancient hands. The bread and the wine had a doom, for these were their host of the air. He sat and played in a dream of her long, dim hair. He played with the merry old men and thought not of evil chance, until one bore Bridget his bride away from the merry dance. He bore her away in his arms, the handsomest young man there, and his neck and his breast and his arms were drowned in her long dim hair. O'Driscoll scattered the cards, and out of his dream awoke. Old men and young girls were gone like a drifting smoke. But he heard high up in the air a piper piping away, and never was piping so sad, and never was piping so gay. Bridget was carried away. At the apex of the story of Tam O'Hare, says, and he sat by the standing stone, and he wept. But high on the air, the pipes were playing, and never was piping so sad, and never was piping so sweet. The loss to something beautiful. I have some more. This is one that I ran across, and some of his messages were, I think, plain, ordinary messages of life. And this one he wrote has a title called "To a Friend Whose Work Has Come to Nothing." Now all the truth is out, be secret and take defeat from any brazen throat, for how can you compete, being honor bred with one who, were it proved he lies, were neither shamed in his own nor in his neighbor's eyes. Bred to a harder thing than triumph turn away, and like a laughing string whereon mad fingers play, amid a place of stone, be secret and exalt, because of all things known, that is most difficult. And I want to read one more of his, and then I want to go to some poetry that I had written. This is one I would read to my kids all the time when they were little. I have little kids now, but I haven't introduced them to Yeats poetry yet. Maybe I will soon. This one you may have heard before. Lorena McKennitt, if you're familiar with her music, has taken this poem of Yeats and turned it into a song called "The Stolen Child." Where dips the rocky highland of Sleuthwood in the lake, there lies a leafy island where flapping herons wake the drowsy water rats. There we've hid our fairy vats, full of berries and of reddest stolen cherries. Come away, O human child, to the waters and the wild, with a fairy hand in hand. For the world's more full of weeping than you can understand. Where the wave of moonlight glosses the dim grey sands with light, far off by furthest Rosses we footed all the night, weaving olden dances, mingling hands and mingling glances, till the moon has taken flight to and fro. We leap and chase the frothy bubbles, while the world is full of troubles and is anxious in its sleep. Come away, O human child, to the waters and the wild, with a fairy hand in hand, for the world's more full of weeping than you can understand. Where the wandering water gushes from the hills above Glencar, in pools among the rushes that scarce could bathe a star, we seek for slumbering trout, and whispering in their ears, giving them unquiet dreams, leaning softly out from ferns that drop their tears over the young streams. Come away, O human child, to the waters and the wild, with a fairy hand in hand, for the world's more full of weeping than you can understand. Away with us he's going, the solemn-eyed. He'll hear no more the lowing of the calves on the warm hillside, or the kettle on the hob sings peace into his breast, or see the brown mice bob round and round the oatmeal chest. For he comes, the human child, to the waters and the wild, with a fairy hand in hand. For the world's more full of weeping than he can understand. I'm going to get something here off of my shelf behind me. So I believe this is where it is. Oh, maybe not. I might have just lied to you about what I'm going to read next to you. Hold on one moment. I know this is live radio. It could be in this cabinet over here. I'm looking. I don't see it. I don't know where on earth it has gone. So, if you will pardon me for just a moment, I'll keep talking from over there because I think it might be in that cabinet. And if it's not, then we'll skip it and we'll move on. But here, you're getting the heart of Yeats, the heart of his poetry, the heart of what he was all about. And when I said he wrote to every conceivable situation of human life, I meant that. And you can see how he writes and what he writes, and maybe start to understand a bit of why he writes what he writes. Now, I don't see the book I'm looking for, which vexes me deeply. I just saw it the other day, and that's why I just thought of this and said, I'm going to go ahead and read something from this. And yet now, and I thought if I just turned around, it was going to be right there, and it's not. Which I find, oh, wait, I'm wrong, here it is. It was buried. All right. So thank you for that little indulgence. As I was searching for this, I knew I had seen it very recently. Here it is. This is a little book where I wrote poetry many years ago. This book is very old. And I've got some things in here that I've even got, I believe that's a sprig of holly from Scotland, if I'm not mistaken. How about that? And I thought there were a few other things like that in the pages of this book. I've got I've written down, as you can see here, old readings and things. Tarot and things like that. Is there something else in these pages? No. I have some mundane things written in here, but I have some poetry. And I thought, while I was reading, that this would be something fun to look at. And I may have read these before, a long time ago, on my YouTube channel. I wrote this little one. This one right here, I wrote this down in 1990, September of 1990. It's entitled On Viewing a Chalky Hillside. And this is where I was driving through England back in 1990, and I stopped for petrol, and as I kind of paced around a little bit outside, just walked around, soaking in the atmosphere, there was a hill way across the field in the back, and there was a white chalk horse carved out of the hillside. And I saw that, and then I wrote this little poem as a result of seeing that. Equine blood and nobles breeds, their sons and daughters mount their steeds, while carving out their chalky creeds from under the hillside sod. On the crest beneath the grove, druids chanted, children strove to etch the god-breed spirit's love, now seen from Henry's tower. Whitened hands came cracked and dry, the spirit freshened feigned belies, equine elegance for the eyes, time's not worn away. A horse, my kingdom for a horse, the cry that altered history's course, when all I do is gaze upon the source of timeless beauty's mount. Henry's Tower, by the way, is a landmark from the time of Henry VIII, which is on a distant hill, and you can see the horse from that hill. That's what that meant. But this is the one here that I wanted to read for you. When I wrote my poetries, when I wrote, this is interesting, by the way, those of you watching, there is a slide tucked in the pocket. Oh. And this is a poem I wrote in October of 1998. It's called Diana's Brightness. This is one I think I may have read before when this channel was very young, back in those days. 98. That's the year I penned The Rollicking Adventures of Tam O'Hare. That's the year I lived alone with my little daughters for 6 to 8 months, when my wife at the time was in alcoholic treatment. And I wrote, "The world is a hollow place, without a sea or sky, that can be reached by common means, though tearing abjectly at the seams where Apollo's brazen follies fly. When a youth, with youth in hand, I, free and thoughtless of youth's end, bore that golden treasure free to farthest reaches seeking sea, now shadowless I sit on saltless sand. The strand moves on, sand's beams are roar, no sparkling surf save in mind's eye. Apollo and Neptune in ambivalence turn their backs my fortunes fain would spurn. For who am I but one who swore? The light is only in my eyes, the sea is only sea of mind. And all the while through life I tread, bearing misconceptions dread, would only prove my wisdom lies. Apollo, then, in hapless deed, let a shadow cross my feet, who fair Diana's brightness bore, never dreamed nor seen before, tempted me wake and break my creed. The light she bore seemed more than real. I fumbled words to defend my creed, of ethereal formless sun and sea, whose foam and gleams carnality had been dead too long to make me feel the warmth of the sun and the spray of the sea. Unwitting she turned Apollo back, and in her eyes of igniting fire, rare beauty and finery dulled my ire, tearing love from the blackened heart in me. Barefoot and free, in the surf I sigh, my shadow cast upon the sand. The youth returned and bade me follow. Oh, the world indeed is hollow, but I have touched and held the sky. That was back in October of 1998. I wrote that. Do I have time for one more? This is one of my own. This is more a love poem. And I'll send you on your merry ways with a love poem, a romantic poem from a romantic's heart. While musing on autumn and closeness, it's called. It's in the little different colored ink here. Resplendent death and the wandering fay, tightly held hands through the brown and yellow bray. Richly hued sky out in varied indigos, a soft pinkness to your cheek and a sniffle in your nose, belies more than all the crisp coolness in the air. Iridescent forest, all the branches blown bare, the once green and lush canopy no longer there, is now a fallen carpet, lighting the wood with its gold. You press yourself tightly, less for the cold than the comforting warmth of being close. I let loose your hand, and I step out ahead. I spin to the sky, my face up, my arms spread. With uncontrollable urge you join in my folly, and we spin like we did when small children with all the innocence of no knowledge of the world. What a wondrous place! I declare, I pretend, this would be for a cottage to build and to fend off the world and its troubles, a place to create some semblance of peace, some distraction from fate, where drawing you in I find perfect rest. The glimmering stars, the whispering trout are there in your eyes as you gaze all about, the autumnal dance that circles us around. It's then in that moment I know that I've found rarest beauty. We stop and reach out to hands that are cold, not of inner decrease or love that's grown old. As fall's yellow leaves stop and settle our trust, declaring death to subtle death all around us, burnishing a depth and a trueness within. We clench our hands tightly, the dead leaves crinkling beneath our feet. Folks, thanks for being here tonight. Thanks for listening. Thanks for indulging. You have a good night, and we'll see you tomorrow.